Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. He heard it through the truck window, and his hands tightened on the wheel before his mind had even registered what the sound was. It was not barking. It was something older than barking, something raw, something that came from a place inside a living creature where language has never reached and pain has always lived. It came from behind the concrete wall of the Clatsop County Animal Shelter on the edge of Astoria, Oregon, and it moved through Nathan Mercer's chest like a frequency he had not felt in 18 years, but had never, not for a single day, forgotten. He should have kept driving. He had flour in the truck, coffee, kerosene, fuel. He had a 30-minute drive back up the coast road to a cabin where the fog came in off the Pacific every evening and swallowed the world, and no one knocked on the door, and nothing asked anything of him. And that was the life he had chosen, carefully and deliberately, and he had never once allowed himself to regret it. But his foot was already on the brake. He sat for a moment, engine idling, rain moving in slow gray sheets across the windshield, that sound growing louder and more desperate and more achingly familiar with every breath he took. Then Nathan Mercer, who had not done an impulsive thing in 18 years, put the truck in reverse and pulled into the shelter parking lot. The animal control officer outside the reinforced kennel run was pressing a blood-soaked bandage against his forearm with trembling hands. Young, pale, his name tag read Kyle Benton, and his eyes were fixed on the kennel door with the wide, glassy expression of a man who has just understood, very recently and very suddenly, that he is not in control of the situation he is standing in. "Sir, this area is restricted," Kyle said, straightening up. "We have a dangerous animal in that run. You need to step back." "What branch did he serve with?" Nate said quietly. "What?" Nate nodded toward the kennel. "The dog. What branch?" Kyle stared at him for a moment. Then he stepped aside. Inside the kennel, a German shepherd was destroying himself against the chain link. He was large, dark-saddled, with a black muzzle that had begun to go gray at the edges, and a coat that had lost its shine the way coats do when an animal has stopped caring for itself. His paws were raw and bleeding from the concrete. His ribs pressed faintly against his fur when he moved. He had been magnificent once. You could still see it in the structure of him, in the depth of his chest and the power of his hindquarters, and the particular intelligence of his faith. Even now, even like this. He had been someone's partner once, someone's most trusted companion, and the world had taken that from him without explanation and left him here, in a concrete box, with the war still running at full volume inside his head. But it was not his condition that stopped Nathan Mercer. It was his eyes. They were amber, dark at the edges, and they were not the eyes of a vicious animal. They were the eyes of a soldier who had not been told the war was over. Between each lunge at the chain link, his head snapped upward, scanning the roofline above the kennel with the precise trained efficiency of an animal checking for overhead threat. His ears rotated constantly, forward, sideways, flat, forward again, reading angles, processing information, tracking a threat assessment that existed only inside the landscape of his trauma. In the half-second pauses between his charges, his weight shifted to his hindquarters and his body coiled low, ready to move laterally, ready to breach, ready to do the job that someone had trained him to do and that no one had ever properly untrained him from. Nate had seen this before, not in a kennel, in a forward operating base in Afghanistan, in a dark corridor, in the seconds before everything went wrong. His eyes found the small metal tag wired to the kennel door. Ranger, MWD 8873, discharged, 2024. Something very old and very painful moved inside Nathan Mercer's chest.
He had kept it still for 18 years through sheer discipline and sheer distance, through coastline and fog and silence and the deliberate absence of anything that might disturb it. But it moved now, slowly and heavily, like something enormous shifting in deep water, and he could not stop it. He thought about Ajax. Ajax had been a Belgian Malinois, 68 pounds of muscle and precision and loyalty so complete and so unconditional that it had felt at the time like something Nathan Mercer did not deserve and could not explain and could not imagine living without. He had been assigned to Nate 3 years before the mission in Afghanistan, and in those 3 years he had become the truest thing in Nate's life. Not because he was useful, not because he was trained, but because every single day, without fail, without condition, without ever asking for anything in return, Ajax had looked at Nathan Mercer and chosen him, completely, quietly, the way only a dog can choose a person, with his whole self and no reservation whatsoever.
In the fall of 2008, during a night raid, Ajax had alerted to an explosive device. Nate had processed the signal, made the calculation, and given the forward command. The blast had followed. And for 18 years, the only thing Nathan Mercer had known with absolute certainty was that he had given the command that killed the one creature on Earth who had ever loved him without condition. That belief had taken everything from him, one thing at a time. His team, his marriage, his ability to sit in a room with someone who looked at him with trust in their eyes, without feeling the full, crushing weight of what he believed he had done to the last creature who had trusted him that completely. So he had run, as far as he could run without leaving the country, to the Oregon coast, where the land ends and the ocean begins, and the fog erases everything, and a man can disappear into the gray and the wind and the sound of waves, and be no one, and remember everything, and punish himself in the quietest and most thorough way available to him. He pulled a wooden chair from inside the shelter doorway. He carried it to the kennel and set it down 10 feet from the chain link. He sat down, angled his body slightly away from Ranger so that he was not presenting as a direct threat, opened the paperback novel in his jacket pocket, softened his eyes, and breathed. "Sir?" Kyle said from behind him. "What are you doing?" "Sitting," Nate said. Ranger lunged. The chain link shuddered. Kyle took 3 steps back. Nate turned a page he had not read and breathed and stayed. He came back every morning. He moved the chair 2 inches closer each day. On the second morning, he rested his palm against the chain link, open and still, so that Ranger could smell him if he chose to. He slid thin strips of seared liver under the gate and moved his hand away slowly, giving the dog space to decide. Ranger did not eat, not the first day, but he stopped lunging for 11 seconds and lowered his nose to the concrete near the liver and breathed in, and his ears shifted sideways in a way that was not aggression. It was uncertainty, and uncertainty meant the door was not yet closed. On the third morning, in the thin gray light before the shelter opened, Nate spoke for the first time. One word offered quietly into the space between them, like something fragile. "Sits," he said. "Sit." Ranger stopped mid-lunge. His entire body went rigid. His amber eyes, dark-edged and exhausted and carrying more than any animal should ever have to carry, turned toward Nate and held. Something moved behind them. Something deep and buried and not yet extinguished. Some muscle memory from before the trauma, from before the civilian who had adopted him and broken what the war had not quite managed to break, flickered like a match in a long, dark room. He did not sit, but he did not lunge again, not for 4 full minutes. And 4 minutes, for a dog like this, was everything. It was Claire Donovan who brought the paperwork on the 5th day. The shelter's veterinary technician, calm and direct, and quietly relentless in the way of people who have chosen to spend their lives fighting for creatures who cannot advocate for themselves. She stood beside the chair with a folder in her hands and told Nate about the 7-day order and the county insurance carrier and the military working dog sanctuary in Colorado that would take Ranger if he could be documented walking calmly on leash from kennel to transport vehicle. Muzzle, leash, walk, she said simply. That's the mission. Nate looked at her. How many days do we have left? 2, she said. He nodded once and looked back at Ranger, who was watching the conversation from behind the chain link, with his ears forward and his body completely still. The first time he had been completely still since Nate arrived. That evening, Nate sat on the tailgate of his truck in the empty parking lot, with the marine layer pressing low and dark overhead, and he told Claire about Ajax. He had never told anyone. Not his teammates, not the counselors the Navy had offered him and that he had refused, not the wife who had tried to reach him for 2 years before she finally stopped trying. He told Claire because something about the past 5 days, about sitting in the rain outside that kennel and being slowly, painfully reminded of what it felt like to be present in the world, had loosened something in him that he had not known was still capable of loosening. He told her about the raid, about the alert, about the forward command and the sound that followed and the silence that came after. I sent him, Nate said. His voice was flat and stripped of everything. I sent him, and he went, and he didn't come back. Claire was quiet for a long moment. The rain tapped softly on the truck hood between them. When she spoke, she did not reach for comfort, and she did not soften it.
Then don't let your past kill this one too, she said. He drove home in the dark. He did not sleep. He sat at the small table in his cabin and listened to the Pacific work itself against the cliffs below, relentless and ancient and utterly indifferent. And he thought about Ajax's eyes. Amber, dark at the edges. The way they had looked at him every morning of those 3 years, with a completeness of trust that he had never found anywhere else in his life, before or since. He sat with that for a long time. Then he got up, drove to the 24-hour gas station on the edge of town, stood under the fluorescent light in the rain, and called Mark Ellison for the first time in 18 years. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, older now, rougher, but unmistakably the same. Nate. Not a question. The voice of a man who had been waiting. Nate. Nate's throat tightened. He pressed on. I need to know what happened that morning with Ajax. I need the truth. A long silence settled over the line. Nate could hear Mark breathing on the other end, slow and deliberate, the way men breathe when they are deciding how to carry something heavy across to another person without dropping it. Ajax alerted correctly. The device he found was a decoy, Nate. There was a secondary pressure plate, wired to take out the entry team. I stepped directly into its path. He stopped. When he continued, his voice had changed. Ajax saw it. He broke your command. He didn't go forward toward the decoy. He came back for me. He hit me at full speed and took me off my feet and put himself between me and that plate. Another pause. Longer this time. He absorbed the blast, Nate. He saved my life. I have been living inside that fact for 18 years, and I have been waiting 18 years for the chance to tell you. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The rain fell. Somewhere across the road, the river moved silently in the dark. You didn't send him to die, Mark said. His voice was thick now, and he did not try to hide it. He chose to protect. That was Ajax. That was who he was. You gave him the command, and he heard it, and he looked at me stepping into that plate, and he made his own decision. The last and greatest decision of his life, and it was his, not yours. Nathan Mercer stood in that parking lot, under that buzzing light, in the Oregon rain, and felt 18 years of the wrong weight leave his body all at once. Not gently, not cleanly, the way a dam breaks, suddenly and completely, and with no possibility of putting it back. He had not killed Ajax. Ajax had saved Mark. And Nathan Mercer had spent 18 years exiled on the edge of the world, punishing himself for a decision that had never been his to carry. He drove back to the shelter before dawn and walked directly to Ranger's kennel. No chair, no book, no distance. He opened the kennel door and stepped inside, and Ranger was on his feet instantly, back against the far wall, a growl building low in his chest, his amber eyes locked on Nate with the full defensive force of an animal who had learned through great and repeated pain that humans who entered his space uninvited brought nothing good. He knelt on the concrete floor. He placed his hands on his thighs, palms open and upward, and he looked at the ground between them, and he breathed, and he spoke. Not to perform, not to train, but because the truth needed to be spoken out loud in the presence of another living creature before it could become fully real. "I ran," he said quietly. "I left my team. I left my dog. I spent 18 years believing a lie because the truth was too heavy and I was not strong enough to carry it." He paused. "Ajax didn't die because of me. He died choosing to protect. And I have been punishing myself and everyone around me and every animal that ever needed me for something that was never mine to carry." His voice broke, just slightly, at the edges. He let it. "I'm not running anymore." The growl faded. The kennel was very still. For a long time, nothing moved at all. Then Ranger began to come forward, slowly, with his belly low and his body trembling from the effort of overriding every defensive instinct he had built over years of pain, one paw at a time. He stretched his dark muzzle toward Nate's open hands and breathed in deeply, reading him the way only a dog can read a person, past the surface and past the silence and past everything a human being tries to hide, down to the place where the truth actually lives. What he found there made him take one more step forward. He pressed his forehead against Nate's chest, not nudging, not seeking, anchoring, the way a soldier presses his back against a wall in the dark, simply to feel something real and solid and steady in a world that has offered him nothing solid for a very long time.
And Nathan Mercer wrapped his arms around that great, scarred, gray-muzzled head, and for the first time in 18 years, he wept. Quietly and completely, pressed into the rough fur of Ranger's neck, while the dog stood perfectly still and let him. And outside the kennel, the Oregon morning came in gray and slow and gentle through the shelter windows. Two warriors, both stranded after wars that had ended without them, both choosing, in that quiet concrete room, not to run anymore. Ranger accepted the muzzle the following morning. He walked on leash that afternoon, close to Nate's left side, his gait slightly stiff, his ears moving constantly, but his body calm enough to document, calm enough to qualify. Claire filmed it on her phone with tears running silently down her face that she did not bother to wipe away. But that night, the storm came. It hit the coast the way Pacific storms hit in November, without warning and without mercy, thunder cracking across the cliffs and long rolling concussions that moved through the darkness like artillery. At his cabin, Nate came off the cot and hit the floor with his back against the wall before he was fully awake, hands shaking, breath locked in his chest, because some things do not unlearn themselves in a week, and some sounds reach past the mind and take the body somewhere the mind has already agreed to leave behind.
At the shelter, the thunder detonated inside the concrete corridors like a series of explosions, and Ranger came apart completely. He hit the kennel door again and again with everything he had, and the compromised latch gave way on the fourth impact, and he ran into the storm and the dark and the driving rain with his heart at full military throttle and nowhere to go. Kyle arrived at dawn to find the broken kennel and reached for his radio with a face that had already made its decision. Claire stepped into his path in the parking lot, quietly and without drama. Tom Alvarez, the shelter director, arrived 8 minutes later in his old Coast Guard truck, looked at the situation, and gave Nate 24 hours. Nate already knew where Ranger had gone. High ground, defensible position, sight lines in multiple directions. He drove to the old coastal artillery battery above the river mouth, a crumbling Second World War relic half swallowed by blackberry vines and coastal grass, and he tracked Ranger's prints through the wet sand and dark mud up the long slope to a collapsed concrete bunker that looked out over the place where the Columbia River met the Pacific. Inside, in the gray morning light, Ranger was trapped. His rear leg had caught between two pieces of rusted rebar protruding from the rubble, and he had twisted trying to free himself and driven the metal deeper, and he was exhausted and bleeding and snarling with the last reserves of an animal who has decided that pain is preferable to surrender. Nate slid down into the rubble without stopping. The broken edge of a concrete block opened a long gash across his palm. He did not look at it. He knelt in the debris 2 feet from Ranger, and he did not reach, and he did not command, and he did not rush. He rested his bleeding hand on the rubble between them, open and still, and he waited. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not leaving." Ranger snarled, then whimpered, then snarled again, quieter this time, the sound of an animal running out of fight and beginning, despite itself, to remember what safety felt like. Nate stayed. It took nearly an hour of sitting in the rubble with the rain coming in through the broken bunker roof and the river visible through the gap in the concrete wall, silver and wide and moving steadily toward the sea. An hour of breathing and waiting and being the one still, steady thing in Ranger's world. And then finally, the snarling stopped. Ranger's head lowered. His amber eyes found Nate's face and held, and in them was something that had not been there before. Something exhausted and hurting and fragile and real. Trust, not given, chosen. Nate freed the leg from the rebar with steady, careful hands. He fashioned a harness from his belt. He guided Ranger up through the crumbling slope, one slow and painful step at a time, both of them bleeding, both of them shaking, the dog leaning into the man's side, and the man bracing against the weight of him with everything he had, until they emerged from the bunker together at dusk, with the Pacific burning red and orange behind them, and the wind coming in cold and clean off the water. Kyle was at the bottom of the slope. His hand dropped from his radio when he saw them. He looked at Ranger, limping and calm, pressed against Nate's leg. He looked at the blood on Nate's hand. He stood very still for a long moment, and then he walked to his truck without a word, retrieved his medical kit, and set it on the hood between them. It was the closest thing to peace that parking lot had ever held. Ranger healed slowly. His leg carried a permanent stiffness that he bore with a quiet dignity that made everyone who saw it fall a little silent. Tom offered Nate the caretaker cottage on shelter property and a position working with every dog the county had labeled unadoptable. Nate accepted without looking back at the cabin above the cliffs, or the 18 years of fog and silence, or the man he had been inside all of it.
Months passed. Smoke rose from the cottage chimney on winter mornings. Ranger slept on the porch steps in the thin winter sun, his great dark head resting on his scarred paws, his amber eyes soft and half closed, finally still.
Claire built warriors and canines from the ground up, and it grew faster than anyone expected because the need had always been there, waiting for someone to see it. A letter arrived from Mark Ellison in early spring, a donation inside, and a single handwritten line. For Ajax, and for coming home. Nate sat at the kitchen table with the letter open in front of him, and Ranger's warm weight pressed against his leg, and the sound of the Pacific drifting up from the cliffs below. And he thought about Ajax, those amber eyes, dark at the edges, the way he had looked at Nate every morning of those 3 years with a completeness of trust that asked for nothing and gave everything. He thought about what Mark had told him, about Ajax breaking command and coming back and choosing in the last seconds of his life to protect the man beside him. He thought, that was always who you were, and I am sorry it took me 18 years to stop being ashamed of how much I loved you. He rested his hand on Ranger's head, felt the slow, steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing beneath his palm, felt the warmth of a living thing that had chosen, against every reason it had not to trust him. And for the first time in 18 years, Nathan Mercer said it out loud, quietly, without shame, without the weight of a lie pressed against the center of his chest.
"I'm ready," he said. Ranger's tail moved once against the cottage floor, slow and certain, and that, in the end, was enough. If this story moved something inside you tonight, something quiet and true and worth holding on to, then you already know why Silent Paws and Brave Hearts exists. Every story on this channel is built on one belief, that loyalty is real, that love that asks nothing in return is the most powerful force in this world, and that sometimes the bravest thing any of us will ever do is simply stop running, turn around, and choose to stay. If you believe that, please subscribe to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this one reached you tonight, if it reminded you of a dog you have loved, or a burden you have carried too long, or a truth you have not yet allowed yourself to hear, please share it with someone who needs it, someone who is still running, someone who needs to know it is not too late to come home. We will see you in the next story. Until then, be gentle with the ones who cannot speak for themselves, and never stop believing that staying, simply and quietly staying, is sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do.